In a sport full of alpha males and big personalities, mixed in with the possibility of serious injury, less money than other major sports, and the humiliation that sometimes comes with the sport. Sometimes fighting words are taken too far and lead to legendary beefs that capture the eyes of many new fight fans, while also catapulting the UFC forwards in popularity. So with that said, let's get into the top 3 beefs in the UFC that helped form the UFC into what we have today. Number 3, Chuck Liddell vs Tito Ortiz. For this beef we are going all the way back to the early 2000s in the light heavyweight division, where two former friends are on a collision course for a beef that spanned over 15 years and two different fight organizations. In the year 2000, Tito Ortiz had just captured the light heavyweight championship from Wanderlei Silva, with the help from his training partner and friend Chuck Liddell. However, with Tito now being the light heavyweight champion and Chuck on the rise to #1 contender, everything would change. Although Tito would do everything in his power to avoid the fight, quickly stated, "I'm a bad fight for him, a bad style," said Chuck, and he knows that. "I'm a really tough fight for him because I strike really well and I'm really hard to take down." When he fights someone who can strike, all he wants to do is take them down. We train together a little bit and he knows he'll have a hard time taking me down. But after Tito lost his belt to Randy Couture, the UFC, who had a special interest in seeing the fight, as Dana didn't like Tito and wanted to see Chuck knock him out. Dana ultimately forced Tito to fight Chuck if he wanted another title fight, so being backed into a corner, Tito finally accepted the fight at UFC 47, where Chuck would dominate Tito before getting the second round knockout. Chuck would then go on to win the light heavyweight title, while Tito put together a 5-fight win streak against Patrick Cote, Vitor Belfort, Forrest Griffin, and 2 grudge matches with Ken Shamrock. In 2006, this and the fact that Tito had stated he wasn't himself in the first fight with Chuck due to the friendship that they once shared, but he had dropped these sentiments and was ready to fight Liddell at full power now. During the fight, Tito stayed true to his words and showed the first fight was lucky. This time he managed to last a whole extra round before getting knocked out by Chuck. The next installment of this beef would come in 2010, when both fighters was at the latter part of their career. Dana White would announce that both fighters would be the coach of the reality show The Ultimate Fighter. Chuck initially was not keen to do this at all, but Dana was able to persuade him with the fact that after the show, the two head coaches from each team would fight it out, so this would give Chuck a chance to beat up on Tito. But on episode 9, Tito revealed to Dana he needed back surgery, so he was pulling out of the fight with Chuck at UFC 115. And this episode ended with Dana telling Chuck,
"You don't pull out of the fight. Don't break your phone.
I'm gonna go punch him. Don't let that guy fight anymore, man. He's pussy."
Now everyone thought this was the end of the rivalry as Chuck retired later that year, but in 2018, as Dana likes to call him, Oscar De La Weirdo entered the scene trying to start his own martial arts promotion. And who did he announce as the main event? None other than Tito Ortiz vs Chuck Liddell, with Tito at the young age of 43 and Chuck Liddell at an even younger age of 48 years young. This fight was sad to watch. Neither man had any business in the cage that night, but more so Chuck Liddell, as the age was evident and he was quickly knocked out in the first round by Tito, making the score 2 knockouts for Chuck and 1 knockout for Tito. I just hope when they both go into retirement homes, they're on the opposite sides of the country, otherwise them nursing staff are in for a wild time. Number 2, John Jones vs Daniel Cormier. At the time, the two arguably greatest fighters in the UFC was John Jones and Daniel Cormier. Now these couldn't be two more polar opposite people, with John Jones openly admitting to partying and doing coke and having that all-around bad boy aura to him, and Daniel Cormier, a former Olympian who has done everything right in his life to fight for the place he has. This was truly a beef for the ages, This beef had it all from press conference arguments and brawls to 2 epic title fights and a fighter being suspended. From the very first interaction, when these two literally clashed heads and caused a brawl, the UFC fans around the world knew we were in for something else with this fight. Although this was a good fight, Jones was able to stop Daniel's takedowns and even get some takedowns of himself, leading to a unanimous decision win for Jon Jones. But only a few months later, Jon Jones was involved in a hit-and-run accident with a pregnant woman where she received a broken arm. Because of his behavior, he was stripped and suspended from the UFC. During this time, Daniel Cormier would capture the vacant light heavyweight championship against a hard-hitting Anthony Johnson, and then defended his belt against Alexander Gustafsson and a rematch with Anthony Johnson before Jon Jones would return. In the lead up to the fight, the fierce rivalry would pick up where it left off, with DC giving Jon Jones a lot of shit about his drug abuse and recent behaviors. However, when the fight came around, Jon proved he had an extra little edge on Daniel Cormier, being able to out-cardio Daniel and eventually getting a head kick in the 3rd round to rock Daniel. Jon Jones capitalized on this, tripping him and finishing him with some ground and pound. After the fight, Daniel Cormier tearfully stated,
"You know, the one way or the other, I'm going to stand across the cage from that man again, and I'll believe just as I did tonight, and I'll take the fight to him again, I guess."
But soon it was revealed what that extra little edge was in the form of a ped called Turinabol. This would be the end of the competition between the two fighters, but the rivalry between the two will never truly be settled. For the number 1 spot, we have a brash rising Irish superstar, and on the other side of the coin, we have a Dagestani wrestling machine. Now, Conor started his career at featherweight, while Khabib was climbing the ranks of the lightweight. So in the beginning, Khabib was seen as a friend of Conor and almost a fan. But everything changed when Conor got an immediate title fight on his 155-pound debut against Eddie Alvarez, a fight that was originally supposed to be Khabib vs Eddie for the title. With Conor being a featherweight champion and such a big star in the organization, the UFC wanted to catapult him to the first ever double champion, which he accomplished in a spectacular performance against Eddie Alvarez. Meanwhile, Khabib was relegated to the undercard in a fight against Michael Johnson, where during the fight, Khabib is ground and pounding Johnson while telling him this would just add fire to the beef between the two. After the fight, Conor would go on to box Floyd Mayweather, while Khabib would beat Edson Barboza to earn a title fight against Tony, where the moment the first strike was thrown, Conor would be stripped of the belt. However, as we know, this fight would never materialize, but this time it was from Tony Ferguson tripping on some wires at the UFC media shoot and tearing his knee, forcing him to pull out. Max would step up to fight Khabib, but this fight would be cancelled as Max was struggling with the weight cut. So now we have Max being pulled out from the fight. The UFC replaced him with Al Quinta. During this time, an interview with Artem Lobov, a teammate of Conor McGregor, was going viral, where Lobov said,
Он снимается. Так кто здесь чикен у нас? Кто боится секунд? Будет сниматься каждый раз. Что еще тут говорить?
This comment led to Khabib and his team cornering Artem in a hotel lobby.
Laps Artem before leaving.
Seeing this clip, Conor loaded up his jet and flew straight to Brooklyn to confront Khabib. In what now is a famous incident where Conor grabbed a trolley and decided to smash the window with a trolley. Conor would then have to deal with legal consequences of his actions, while Khabib would go on and dominate Al Quinta to capture the lightweight championship and call out Conor.
He come here, where's Conor? He wanna fight with boss? I wanna fight with real gangster, you know.
But after all the legal issues sorted, the fight was signed for UFC 229 on October 6, 2018. With a very heated press conference.
Remember
You
this?
bought me tea, George, and a little fan.
Yeah,
Listen,
but-
kid, don't be talking to me about
2014.
Twitter in 2012.
No,
Twitter's
I have a
closed.
question. Give me an
Twitter,
answer.
who's on
Well,
Twitter,
what's
mate?
wrong with you?
Ask my
The
boss.
octagon doors were closed and it was time now to fight. Khabib proved his smash-style wrestling was too much for Conor, and even dropped Conor at one stage with a massive overhand. Conor would eventually tap to a neck crank, but this wasn't good enough for Khabib. Someone had to pay for the disrespect he, his family and his friends had endured at the hands of Conor. So Khabib jumped the cage and had a fight with Conor's cornerman, Dylan Dennis, who had been talking shit up to and through the fight. While this happened, Conor had a fight with one of Khabib's cornermen while they were both sat upon the fence, before they were both pulled back to the octagon. At this point, another one of Khabib's cornermen rushed the cage and narrowly missed a sucker punch on Conor, resulting in Conor slipping and landing his own counter straight, before security was eventually able to control both situations and escort both parties out the octagon and arena floor. To this day, these two can still be seen going back and forth on Twitter, although the likelihood of these two fighting again is virtually non-existent. The beef brought the UFC to the forefront of mainstream media, capturing headlines around the world, which ultimately catapulted the UFC to the billion-dollar company we have today. As always, if you liked the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more MMA content.